See, our next speaker is Eric Nichols, who is going to tell you a riveting story that is, you guys, you are hearing from people who are really doing things now, today. You may have followed matters out of El Dorado and Schleicher County, what we call the intersection of religious freedom and state authority over matters that involve the Yearning for Zion Ranch and the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. Eric Nichols calls me at 5:01 yesterday and says, I am not going to make your life easier. I can't be there. I am in pretrial. Warren Jeffs, the leader of Yearning for Zion and the Fundamentalist Church, is about to go on trial, and I will tell you, I'm proud to be part of the team that will be involved in prosecuting. I'm a civil litigator. This is a criminal prosecution. But I was asked to assist in the first trial. There have been approximately a dozen, all men who have faced charges, have been convicted of crimes against children and crimes against the community. But no trial is more important than Monday's. It will receive national and probably international coverage. And Eric said, I'm in pretrial, and we're going into tomorrow, which is today. So I do what any right-thinking person would do. I freak out. And figure, what do I do? And Eric will be here tomorrow, and we'll talk more about this very important topic. But there's some serendipities here, folks. One of which is the chief didn't even know what a perfect segue talking to you about the importance of education and children and those who are at risk and the value of education and what the loss to our communities is for those who suffer from challenges, whether or poverty or educational deficits that result in kids going in very different directions than, fortunately, many of us have been able to take, beginning with the chief. And so Tiffany Roper was kind enough to relieve my anxiety within a matter of minutes of Eric's call. And if you will turn now to page 2 of your agenda, what you will see is our first program dovetails very, very nicely into what the chief and Martha were talking about with y'all. Tiffany is the assistant director for a commission out of the Texas Supreme Court. She will tell you more about that. And it is commissioned to help make improvements in the foster adoptive care system, beginning with the children who are brought into that system. The kids we're talking about are very much the kids that Tiffany and the commission are committed to helping. So without further, let me please introduce to you the Assistant Director of the Permanent Commission for Children, Youth, and Families. Close enough? For Children, Youth, and Families. Tiffany Roper.
Well, good afternoon, and David, if you had told me this was going to be videotaped, I don't know if I would have said yes. No. So now I'll have to present very stiffly and without personality, because you never know. I don't want to embarrass the court. I'm really fortunate. I am the Assistant Director of the Supreme Court of Texas Permanent Judicial Commission for Children, Youth, and Families. And Chief Justice Jefferson is an incredible man to work for, and he's very supportive of the work of the commission. And Texas is unique. There are several other states that have a similar commission, but our commission is judicially led. The court has very impressively backed the commission, and we have the involvement of lots of judges around the state. And I'm assuming probably I know some of the judges who hear Child Protective Services cases in your communities as well. Well, I'm here, and I was supposed to be joined by the executive director of the Children's Commission, but she has been called to Washington, D.C. Part of what we do at the commission is to administer a federal court improvement program grant. And, you know, everything is kind of up in the air up in Washington, and so she is testifying tomorrow in front of the Senate Finance Committee about the work that we're doing with those grant funds. So she apologizes that she couldn't be here today. Well, I'm going to give a very quick overview of what the Children's Commission is, and then I'm going to talk to you about a newly formed committee of the commission, which is looking at educational outcomes of foster youth, which, as you'll see by some data that I'm going to show later in the presentation, educational outcomes of foster youth are pretty dismal, not only in Texas, but nationally as well. And also, I just want to talk a little bit about foster kids. Foster kids present some very unique challenges when they're in an educational setting. And there's some reasons behind that, and some that you might suspect and some that you may not. And so I'll be talking about that as well. And I want to say before I go any further, kind of my primary, I guess, work or job in life is I'm a mom. I have 9-year-old twins who are going to be in 4th grade next year and a 7-year-old that's going to be entering 2nd grade. And I commend all of you. I am in awe every day as my kids go to school, and they do attend public school here in Austin. The work that teachers do and educators, I think, are the most patient people on the planet. And so thank you for what you do. And if you have any tips of how I can deal with 3 kids who are going to be teenagers in a few years, just write them down and slip them to me as I leave, because I'm a little freaked out about that myself. So on to the Children's Commission. Well, this was established by the Supreme Court in 2007, and it's a high-level commission that has courts from around the state, different child protective services stakeholders, including the head of the Department of Family and Protective Services, Texas CASA, which are the court-appointed special advocates or guardians ad litem in a lot of CPS cases. And when I say CPS, I mean Child Protective Services. I try not to sneak in acronyms, but I've decided the education system has even more acronyms than the Child Protective Services system, as I am learning every day as I work on the Education Committee. The Children's Commission is chaired by a justice of the Supreme Court. It's currently chaired by Justice Eva Guzman. And there are roughly 25 members at any time. We keep adding people, basically. It started off at around 18 when I joined the commission, and it's grown since then. And just as an aside, I started work at the commission the day after they picked up all those kids from the Yearning for Zion ranch, so there's a little tie-in there. We basically, in a nutshell, we work with courts around the state who handle child protective services cases. And so our goal is to strengthen them. Those are very sensitive cases. It's a very unique area of the law. It's complex, not only because of the legal or the statutory framework, but also because we're dealing with very vulnerable families. And so it takes a special kind of judge, I think, to be a good judge on these cases. And so we do what we can to support those judges. We've written a bench book for CPS judges. We support an annual conference that just focuses on CPS issues. So, and attorney training for attorneys who represent parties in CPS cases. So we do what we can to support the court system. And if you have any questions, it is post-lunch. I want everyone to be awake. Feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind at all. As I said, I have 3 little kids. I'm interrupted all the time. The Education Committee was created as part of the Supreme Court Children's Commission last year. Before that time, there was 3 standing committees of the Supreme Court: a training committee, kind of a basic, I would say the kitchen sink committee, because it deals with all sorts of different types of court-related projects, and also a data and technology committee. But in 2009, Texas hosted a national summit of justices from Supreme Courts around the country, as well as education agency leaders, to come in and meet with people from their own state to develop state plans to improve just outcomes generally for kids who are in the foster care system. And we have buzzwords in the CPS system. We talk about kids' safety and permanency and well-being. And I think safety is pretty obvious. Permanency deals with when you have a kid that comes into foster care, how quickly can you get that kid to a permanent home? Whether it be returning back to a family that's kind of addressed the challenges it had, whether it be placement with a relative, it could be adoption, or it could be long-term foster care. But you try to get some type of final, I guess, home for that child as quickly as you can. And the one factor that has sort of been ignored, and I don't think it's on purpose, but it's well-being, which to me includes the educational needs of children. And well-being is something that takes a back seat, because when a kid comes into foster care, of course, at first you're worried about safety. Is that kid going to be safe? You know, should that kid go back home? What can we do to make sure that that kid does not suffer abuse and neglect again? And then you look at, well, what are we going to do with this kid long term? I mean, what is in this child's best interest, and where should this child live long term? And sometimes, and I would say often, education takes a back seat in making those type of decisions about kids. And before I worked at the commission, I represented Child Protective Services as a prosecutor. So I am a former trial attorney, and I also represented kids who were in foster care as a clinical professor at UT Law. And even representing clients in that system, education just doesn't come to the forefront when you think about what should happen with kids. And so the Texas team at the National Judicial Leadership Summit really wanted to change that attitude. And so they made it kind of a platform of their team recommendations that a very high level team or group of decision makers in the education and child protection and court systems come together to start making collaborative decisions about to improve educational outcomes of kids in care. And so the Education Committee was created. These are the folks on the Education Committee. The Education Committee itself is fairly small. It's high level, and then it is supported by the work of 4 subcommittees that I'll talk about in a minute. But as you can see, it's got the Commissioner of the Texas Education Agency, the Commissioner of Family and Protective Services, the head of Texas CASA, the Executive Director of TASB, the Executive Director of TASA, as well as some other child protection stakeholders. Now, the Supreme Court created this Education Committee by court order. And since Chief Justice Jefferson has left the building, I can say that the court order has really helped to bring people to the table, although I would say that in front of him as well. You know, the foster care population is such a small percentage of the general school-age kid population that sometimes it's hard to kind of grab people and bring them to the table when they're thinking, this is just a small section of the kids that I deal with on a daily basis. And so I found that court order was very, very successful in getting people to come, although they were pretty willing to otherwise. But in that court order, the Education Committee has been charged with looking at what kind of challenges do foster kids face in the educational setting, and what type of judicial practices do we have in place, good or bad, that are impacting educational outcomes. How can we develop more collaboration between the education and child protective services systems, and how do we bring the courts into the mix? What kind of cross-disciplinary training needs are there? And how do we exchange data, both between the Texas Education Agency and Family and Protective Services, and also how do we get schools more information about foster kids so they can more adequately educate kids? And in turn, how can Child Protective Services get the educational records that they need in order to make decisions about kids? And that right there is one complex mix. And that is going to be something that's very tricky for the Education Committee to work with, but that's kind of in the pipeline right now. I guess most importantly, we are going to be producing a final report in March of 2012 that will include recommendations for the improvement of educational outcomes of foster youth. And these will be recommendations that have been vetted by TEA, TASB, TASA, CPS, and other stakeholders who are involved with the Education Committee. Now, why are we addressing this issue? Well, as I mentioned, outcomes are pretty dismal. Texas foster youth are less likely to graduate and more likely to drop out of school. Is anyone here surprised by that? And I don't have a slide to this effect, but there has been a study done, and Texas foster youth are also more likely to be disciplined in the school setting than other kids. And Chief Justice Jefferson mentioned a report that was released on Wednesday, and this is a report. And if anyone is interested in getting an electronic copy of this report, I can email it to you. My email